I know we are so glad to be here. I feel really honored to be here with you, Adrienne. And I think it's the perfect time of year for our type of books that we've written. But I also am really excited to talk to you today because we both have had somewhat of a similar career, starting with writing young adult fiction and now moving into adult fiction based on a lot of, like, both of our latest books have family curses in them. Yes, I just think this is the right time of year to be talking about all of that stuff.
Did Malice House come out last fall?
It did. It came out. Yep.
Because I was gonna say I read it like right when it came out, and it was the perfect like fall read.
Nice.
But it also has that. Is it considered horror?
We should
probably introduce these books. Actually.
Do you want to start?
Yeah. Okay. So the Unmaking of June Farrow is the book that just came out. It's it's a small town magical realism kind of mystery. Has a pretty romantic storyline as well. And it's about a woman who is burying her grandmother at the start of the book, and all of the women in her family are quote unquote cursed to go mad. And upon her grandmother's death, she kind of is following a series of breadcrumbs to kind of figure out more about this curse on her family and the past of the women in her family and their secrets, and kind of takes her to some very unexpected places. Kind of hard to pitch without spoiling, but that's kind of the gist of it. So it does have that like atmospheric mystery, but still magical element like Malice House as well.
Yeah. And so my book that just came out, Midnight Showing, is the sequel to Malice House, which came out last October. And this is also about a family curse. I think there's probably a lot more blood and slashing.
Yeah,
yours has more kissing.
That's what I was like, it's horror, right? Like if I'm remembering correctly.
It is horror, but it's kind of accessible horror. I would say it's not. It's it's not going to terrify you too much, I think. But in this book, it's about Haven, who is an aspiring artist. And she's the daughter of a famous novelist, someone kind of like Stephen King, who he passes away, and she goes to his family house to clear out all of his things. And while she's looking in the attic, she finds this very strange unpublished manuscript called Bedtime Stories for Monsters. It was very unlike his other stuff. And she's reading it, and she decides that the way she'll jumpstart her career is to illustrate her father's unpublished manuscript and sell them together. But as she starts to illustrate this, strange things happen in this odd little seaside town that she's in, and it seems as though she has awakened some sort of curse. And so that's the first book. It's all about books. It's got a book within a book in it. And it's, it's got evil librarians, nefarious booksellers, ink drinkers,
the literary society.
Yeah, and so it's all about the book world, which was really fun for me to write about. So then when I moved on to Midnight Showing, it's the same characters and they are working within the same curse. The curse is based on creativity, artwork, writing, and this one is for film. And so in this one, they're in LA, and it's sort of touching on sort of that old Hollywood world, the Hitchcock kind of era. And some of those old movie monsters don't want to stay on the screen. And so they're still kind of dealing with that curse that's awoken.
I have a question about, especially coming from like YA to adult. So I can't really imagine myself writing a book that has no fantastical element whatsoever in it. And I'm wondering if that's true for you as well, because even though Malice House is, what is it? What's the series called? Does it have a series name?
The Malice Compendium.
Okay. I probably won't remember. Compendium?
Yep.
Compendium. But this storyline in particular, it's very much feels like it's set in our world. And even in the beginning of the book, it feels like very realistic. Like the house, I mean, it feels ominous and like eerie, but it does feel like just very grounded in our real world. But of course, then we find that there's like these magical elements. Do you think that might always be true for you? And do you think it's because of your background doing fantasy and YA?
I think so. I mean, I would say that it all came out of the same source, which is me being a kid and looking in every wardrobe for Narnia and just feeling like there was magic out there and being so frustrated that it just felt like it was hiding, just out of reach. And I think the reason I kind of became a writer was to put that feeling into words through fiction, and to just sort of, whether or not there's real magic out there, I wanted other people to share that feeling. And I think a lot of people feel that way too. And so even though I love second world fantasies that totally take place in other fantasy worlds, I love books that, don't have any fantasy in them to read. But for me, it's that bridging the gap between the two of them. That's where my heart really lays. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to be constrained by the rules of the real world 100%. Like, I want to be able to like still play with reality and make up some of the rules myself. So that's why, like, every time I think about writing something that has like magical, paranormal, fantastical, whatever you want to call it, element, then it feels very restricting to me, even though I still love to read books that are not that way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because that's just my taste, or if it's because I'm used to writing books that I get to make up the rules. And now like switching over feels very difficult to me. And people say like writing fantasy or whatever is very hard. I find that writing contemporary settings is actually very difficult.
Yes, absolutely. I find whenever I try to write straight contemporary, for me, there's no like balance, opposition. Like, the reason I like to weave in a little bit of the fantasy elements in my book is to have the contrast, because when you have the fantastical elements, it's actually highlighting the regular elements. And so if I don't have anything to like reflect the mundane elements, then they just sort of fall flat for me a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Have you found it to be, coming from the YA background, a different process for your adult novels?
Yeah, I think so. I think writing different, I've also written some middle grade fiction as well. And I find that for every age range I write for, the themes tend to be very similar. It tends to be that touch of fantasy, a little bit spooky, sometimes a lot of bit spooky. But it's what makes those books different is where I'm writing from. And I think with middle grade, I tend to tap into just like that 10-year-old girl who loved reading Secret Garden. And it's just kind of almost like my heart is just really there. Or maybe my gut, I should say, is kind of back then. And then when I write YA books, that's more the 16-year-old me, kind of who just loved those swoony touch of romance, touch of fantasy books. And that's me writing from my heart. And then when I write my adult fiction, I do think I write more from my head. And it's a little bit more cerebral. It's a little bit more writing a puzzle into the books, a lot more research based. And
I think your voice is a little different too.
You think so?
Like, I think it still sounds like you're writing, but it like when I was reading Malice House, I felt like it did feel a little different to me, which I also found with Leigh Bardugo's Adult.
Oh yeah.
Like I haven't read a ton of authors who I have read their YA and then I've read their adult. But I found the same thing, and I don't know exactly what that is, but
yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about, so I haven't read this because it just came out, but I read Spells for Forgetting and adored it. And I felt like it had this amazing kind of fall setting. Does it take place in fall? Because it's with the apple orchard.
Yeah, Spells does. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And when we were talking about the season and how like, I kind of write books that tend to be a little bit spooky. I wondered if you tend to write books that are also a little bit seasonal, like if that's sort of, I don't know if this one takes place in that era as well.
This is like early summer,
okay.
But I think sometimes the stuff that makes things feel like fall and autumn are just because they're atmospheric. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like things that are very like kind of lush and sensory, I think readers tend to call them like, oh, it's a perfect fall read. It's a perfect spooky read or spooky season read, because it feels, I don't know, for lack of better words, a little like chewy. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're reading it, like the setting and everything. So I think that might be what lends itself to the feeling that it's kind of like a fall, feels like a fall book, even though it takes place in summer. So that's probably why.
That's really interesting, because I feel very similarly, like when I read your books, the feeling I get is sort of like when the seasons change into fall. Yeah. And there's that crispness in the air. And you just kind of get that little like kind of like delicious shivers.
Yes.
Where it's not really spooky, it's not really Christmassy. It's just, you're just sort of like, wow, there's just something special happening.
Yeah, like there's something in the air. It feels a little bit magical. The light is changing. It gets a little glowy. So yeah, I think it kind of calls to mind maybe some of the same sensations of that seasonal change.
Yeah.
And I don't know what season the next one is going to take place in, but I intentionally didn't set this in fall because I was like, I can't just write all my books in fall. But it still kind of wound up feeling like fall. And I'm like, wildflowers are blooming on the side of the road. And, whatever. There's rainbows in the sky. But it still winds up feeling, I think, a little bit that way. And that probably is just a reflection of me, coming onto the page.
And what was the original spark of the idea for this book?
Actually, here in Asheville. So if you live in Asheville, do you guys know those little doors that are on the bottom of the building around, what is that road? Forget.
Chicken Lane. Chicken Alley.
Yeah. So there's like all this art and kind of like installation type stuff around downtown. I'm just explaining it for people who don't know. I'm not trying to explain. You're like, I don't know.
I don't know about these doors.
Oh, you don't?
No,
okay.
I don't.
So there's art everywhere in Asheville. And when I came here on my first scouting trip, because I was going to move here, I was walking around downtown by myself and walked past these like little doors. And they're like maybe little more than ankle height. They're just fixed on the side of a brick wall on a random street. And it's just a series of little doors. They look like a little fairy village or something. And I like stopped and I'm like inspecting them. I'm taking pictures of them. And it just kind of got my wheels turning. And I feel like it was just the seed of the idea of like asking those questions of, what's on the other side of these doors? What if I walked through one of these doors? Where could it take me? And so I think that was the first, very beginning of the idea, as far as the door, because a red door is very prominent in this book and where it takes these women. But the story itself, I think also is kind of this reflection of the different lives we live within a lifetime, which like, I think probably as a mom, you'll relate to this, or anybody who just isn't 23 can probably relate to this idea that we all, go through, we feel like we live multiple lifetimes within our own lifetime, which also I was talking to my mom about this like 6 months ago. And I was like, you must feel like this so much, even more than I do. And she's like, that's so true, because you go through this period of your life and it's like, this is my whole world. This is my whole life. And then it all changes and you go into a new season, new chapter, and you feel like that's your whole world and that's your whole life. And then it changes again and again throughout your life. So I feel like this book, we're kind of we're exploring like these different generations of women in this family and the different lives that they've lived, like kind of not metaphorically, but literally. And I think I was like working on that in my head, and it kind of, that met this door. And it kind of just went.
That's really interesting. I think that concept of doors is very interesting when you're thinking about aging in different eras, because some doors open and then a lot of doors also close as you get older, and you're sort of saying goodbye to lives that could have been lived as well.
Yeah.
So that's such a perfect analogy or a metaphor to use to explore that kind of story.
And something that everybody can relate to. Like, I'm sure everybody has that feeling in some aspect of their life.
I'm excited because I still have my like Narnia wardrobe thing. So I'm like, ooh, I want to read your book and open the red door and see what's behind the red door.
Okay, so the reason I was asking before about why is Malice House, is it technically horror, is because it's not slashy. It's not, I could read it and I'm kind of squeamish when it comes to horror stuff. But it still has enough of the creepy feeling. I feel like the most gruesome stuff in the book is the main character's love of horror itself. She's got, this character is really funny. She like insatiably watches horror movies, like the grossest, scariest horror movies, and like that nobody can stomach, but like she's just like eating popcorn and like whatever. But she has like weird illustrations like that. She's like, I'll be like painting my nails or something, and people are like gonna vomit. But that like a reflection of your fascination with creepy?
It is a little bit. Yeah. So the main character, her job kind of on the side is that she writes horror movie recaps for like, of like the really, really dark horror movies.
And is
for,
this a
like,
real
underground
job, by the way?
website. I got in touch with one of Asheville's like movie critics to talk about this with him. And you know, whether or not you could make a lot of money doing this job. She doesn't make a lot, but she makes a little bit. I don't know if you could make a lot of money, but there are these websites. There's one I love called The Movie Spoiler. And now I just discovered a new podcast called, I think Too Scary Didn't Watch, where they recap these scary movies for you. And I'm the one who's too scared to watch it. I cannot stomach scary movies, but I'm absolutely fascinated to know what happens. I have to know what happens in scary movies. And so my husband makes fun of me because whenever I like go away to a hotel for a solo writing retreat, the first thing I do is like pull up scary movie websites, like The Movie Spoiler, you know, and I'm
when
like,
you're away by yourself.
Yes, I know, I do it. I don't watch the movies,
Perfect
but I just
time.
read the recaps and then I love to scare myself like that. And so I thought, who is the person who would be like writing, you know, actually watching these movies? And the main character, you know, she feels like she has something wrong with her, like, because this stuff just doesn't faze her at all. And as you know, learn more about her, you come to understand how she got that way and why she is that way.
I haven't watched a horror movie since The Ring.
I never saw that one. I couldn't watch it.
I watched it in the theater and I have never watched another horror movie since because I'm still traumatized from it. She comes out of the TV. Yeah, it was over. It was over for me. It was never gonna watch another horror.
So for this movie, for this book, because it's all about old Hollywood. And so just as in this book, there's a book within a book that's these like dark, monstrous fairy tales, and they sort of are actually written into this book too. In this one, there's some movie scripts from this old movie studio called Sigil Pictures. That was sort of like a Hitchcockian thing. And so each chapter opens with like a little script excerpt from those different movies. So I had to come up with 8 different old horror movies, which was super fun. I love thinking about this stuff.
Came up with
I
the
just
plots
don't
and
want
everything. You didn't like use classic ones.
They're
all your own.
Yeah, they're all my
that's
own.
fun.
Well, I spend a lot of time reading recaps. So that was really fun for me because I love dancing around the edges of them. Like I can't look directly head on to them, but I can come up with a premise and that sort of thing. That's what's fun for me about it.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have another adult after this?
No, it's just these 2 books.
Okay.
And then I also have, because I like spooky things, Disney asked me to write the novelization of The Nightmare Before Christmas. This is the 30th anniversary of the movie, and there had never been like a full novel written of it. And so this just came out this year as well. And so that is what I've been working on. And then now I'm writing another book in the Nightmare Before Christmas world.
Okay. And is that like announced yet?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
It is. So some of you all might have read Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, which is Sally's spinoff series, which was started by this amazing author, Shay Earnshaw, who wrote the first book. And it's a beautiful book and so beloved, but she was unable to continue the series. And so because I was working on this with Disney, they came to me and said, would you be willing to continue the series? And so that's what I'm working on now. And taking this amazing world that Tim Burton created and then Shay created and building off of that and adding some of my own stuff. And it's just an absolute dream come true because as you can tell, I kind of like this sort of thing. And this movie was always...
Were you one of those kids that loved Nightmare Before Christmas?
I never watched it when it first came out because I have a fear of stop motion animation. Like
fear as in
like I can't watch it. Like it makes me like it creeps me
the
out.
actual animation creeps you out.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Which now makes being a parent very difficult because Shaun the Sheep and Tumbleweed and there's all these shows my kids love that are all stop motion animation. Fantastic Mr. Fox. So I never saw it, but all my friends were obsessed with it, with the movie. And so I knew all the music, I knew all the songs because it was all like the band crowd that was really into it. And so I thought I knew the story. I thought I loved the story. But then when I actually watched the movie for the first time, I was like, it blew my mind because I was like, oh, I thought this person sang this and I thought this person sang this.
Oh, funny.
And so actually getting to like match it all up was really special. And then I realized the movie's supposed to be creepy. And so it made sense for me to be creeped out.
Yeah.
So it actually
Like, okay,
was
it
the
works
perfect
then.
fit. Yeah.
That movie and The Labyrinth and Edward Scissorhands were my favorite
Yes.
movies.
Yes.
When I was a kid, and I watched them over and over and
Oh my
over.
gosh.
And my brother would watch Where the Red Fern Grows. over, over, and over. He's here.
Not the same vibe.
No. We were a little different. We're twins too, so we were like
Oh, wow.
opposite
Yeah.
in some ways. Yeah.
And so what's next for you?
Another adult novel that I am writing right now, actually kind of inspired by being a twin. I haven't even told him about that yet, actually.
Wow.
Guess what? Just kidding. It's another adult novel. It's another kind of that magical realism, small town mystery. And it follows, I'm literally still writing it, so this pitch will probably all be wrong in 3 months. But it's about a woman who is kind of coming to her brother's town after he passes away, sorry. And is kind of like immersing herself in his life to finish this project he was working on, only to find that maybe like his death wasn't as simple as she thought. And you know, mysteries.
Yeah.
There are mysteries. There's a love story, of course. And yeah, it takes place in Northern California in a little tiny town in the Redwoods. So I'm writing that right now. And I still have another young adult duology coming out, comes out early 25. And so that's kind of in process too. I'm going back and forth on revisions right now.
Do you like having a balance between kind of juggling multiple book projects?
I plan to do it for as long as I have ideas for both. And right now I do, but it'll kind of be dependent on if I have ideas that are like exciting enough for me to justify the juggling.
Yeah,
because it is quite difficult. So for now, yes, I'm doing that. But you're kind of like you're doing this, then you're doing this, you're doing this. So like you're kind of focused, right, on one area at a time.
Yeah, that's what I have done the juggling before, and I have learned that I really do like having like one project or one series to kind of focus on.
Yeah.
So right now I'm just so deeply ingrained in the Nightmare Before Christmas world, because that's the book I'm writing right now. And I just saw it's back in theaters around here, so I've got to go see it before it's out of theaters. But yeah, so I just kind of like am sleeping, breathing, eating that right now. And that's I have found a much more pleasant writing experience for me, because when I used to juggle multiple series, I just hated getting so immersed in one world and then having to pull out of it and go into another one. And I felt like, oh, I'm just like soaking this up. Like, I don't want to leave it, you know? And so now just trying to like stay in that story world is kind of like my happy place for writing.
Yeah, it's not ideal, I will say.
Yeah.
The juggling.
I do have another adult idea I want to write that is sort of a Jane Eyre set on the moon.
What?
Where it's like
That's
where
cool.
it's in the future, where the moon has been developed and is kind of now crumbling. Like it's this colony that was sort of this Las Vegas kind of extravagant place to go, destination.
Like a playground type place.
Yeah, playground for the wealthy, and now it's sort of in crumbling decay, but few people live there. And so it's this nanny who is works for the wealthy family there. And there's all sorts of mysteries about this like crumbling formerly grand moon colony.
So then that would be sci-fi.
I mean, I think the setting would be sci-fi,
okay,
but it would be more of a gothic thriller, because the reason I'm interested in that is because the gothic genre, which is what a lot of what I write, and sci-fi can actually have a lot in common when it comes to, they often feel very claustrophobic. There's often, I don't know, just sort of that feeling of being isolated. And
like base human kind of carnal, like instinct. Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see.
Okay. I vote for that book. That sounds very interesting. I love that you like do different types of things too. Like you're not constrained by any specific like genre. Yeah,
I would say as long as it's got, as long as it has like a gothic touch. I mean, even my middle grade books have a tinge of that, the gothic, or at least that kind of classic nostalgia feel to it.
Yeah.
what would you say, what are the words that you keep hearing about from reviewers and readers and everything about the traits that all of your whole body of work has in common?
Typically the words I hear a lot are like cinematic, atmospheric, emotional. I feel like, and I focus a lot on those things stylistically. So I think that makes sense. But I feel like my YA fantasy and my adult stuff, magical realism, they are very different, but it still feels like I wrote both of them. So I think like a reader that reads my YA could pick up my adult and be like, this feels like an Adrienne Young book, but be like, oh, this is so, and I have seen many reviews like that. They're like, this wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be, because they just assume, that it's going to be like my young adult story, or vice versa. Now I feel like with 2 books out, there are a lot of people who have are reading my adult, but they don't know that I've published YA. And so then they're like, what? Pirates? Like, I don't understand. So I think there's like a lot of differences, but still like when it comes to prose and that kind of thing, I think I'm doing a lot of the same things that I always fall back on, and studying, like kind of examining the same themes a lot, which I'm curious if you do this in your books, because I feel like this many books in, how many books, what number book is this for you?
13.
I was, okay. Or earlier today, I was like, I think this is like her 15th book. But do you find that you are examining the same themes and questions over and over and over again? Because I certainly feel like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's some famous quote I wish I could remember about that. That is, every single book an author writes is really just us trying to answer some question for ourselves.
Yeah. Forever.
Yeah.
Endeavor.
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes it's obvious to readers and sometimes it's not, like sometimes I can see something in my book that is like a question I've been grappling with my whole life, and I've never really seen people pick up on that, so I think sometimes it's personal. But for sure, all of my books tend to have an element of, fantasy, a touch of fantasy, but there's always a question about the relationship between a creator and a creation, usually like an artist and the artwork that they do, or a parent and a child. And then also a lot with the relationship between humans and animals, because I do like contrast a lot in my books. And so I like to have animals in the book as the contrast to show us our humanity, like they're the mirror so that we can kind of see ourselves in that. And yeah, every book I write has to have some kind of animal. They don't always make it to the end, depending on the type of book.
Depending on what mood you're in. I feel like when people ask me like what is the book about? Like, what is it really about? And about each book, I'm like, they're all kind of about the same thing, probably. And maybe encapsulate different feelings or like parts of that process, because I also kind of feel like my book, each of my books are a little bit like of a time capsule of myself, like who I was, what I was dealing with, what I was kind of processing at that time. And then that doesn't necessarily translate to the next book, but I feel like the questions I'm asking are almost always the same, or the thing I'm like picking apart. And of course, a lot of readers are never they're reading it for entertainment, so they're not gonna like care much about that stuff or look for it. But I think we're all doing it probably.
I do feel really bad because a lot of the themes in my book are about like just terrible parents, who like, one of my books is Dr. Moreau from the Island of Dr. Moreau, his daughter, and he's this terrible mad scientist. And my poor parents, they're the most lovely people you will ever meet in your life. I had a dream childhood. I had a dream childhood. And my dad, so many people have gone up to him and said, because my first book is called The Madman's Daughter, and they said, "Are you the madman?" But so I feel so bad for them. But I think it's just in literature, the reason I keep putting in like dead parents or difficult parents is because it's all about the main character finding their own path. And that's just a symbol. There's so many like dead parents or difficult parents, because that's just it's almost a symbol of like the world or the system kind of working against your main character, especially in a young adult audience. And so it's just sort of that breaking out on your own kind of feeling.
Yes. I was at dinner with friends last night, and one of them brought that up. Like, have you ever noticed that like in all of your books, the mom's dead, or she's missing, or someone took her, or like something? And I'm like, yeah, I have, but then like there's like what you're talking about, like from craft perspective, but then also convenience perspective of not having to juggle that many characters. It's like every character has to have a backstory, they have to have a goal, and sometimes you just need to get rid of one and be like, get off the page.
Especially if it is a young adult book, because if the parents are alive, why aren't they solving all the problems?
Exactly.
Why aren't they going to the police? You know, and so just easier, just get them out of the way.
Yeah. So next time someone asks me that, I'll be reasons. There are reasons. I can't explain them all, but it does change from young adult to adult, even middle grade, young readers, although that like dead parent trope, orphan trope, like all of that is pretty prevalent throughout the the younger age categories for sure. Yeah.
Well, should we take some questions from the audience?
Yep.
Megan, I was listening to a presentation today by James Patterson. And one of the things he mentioned is the amount of mail he got about don't kill off the animal.
I know.
So
well, I mean, if you're dealing with Dr. Moreau, there's, I blame H.G. Wells. Okay, don't blame me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. There's some strong reader sentiment.
Yes, there is.
Okay. Question from the virtual audience, if we could get that started, and it has to do with writing advice. The question from Liv is for you both. Any advice for writing believable, magical realism stories that feel like magic? A conundrum for the two of you.
Go ahead.
I was listening to a podcast today, actually, that was all about writing believable characters. And one thing that they brought up was trying to channel like tiny universal experiences that we've all had. And the example they gave was, it was a school, and it was cold and the windows were kind of fogging up, and the kids would do like this on the window with their hand and then do little prints, and it makes a baby footprint, It's like, we all did that, but you just don't remember it. And so opening with a movie where the kids were doing that, it just instantly, you're like, oh yeah, okay. It just makes these people kind of real for us. And I think when it comes to bringing in magical realism or a touch of fantasy, it's still all about those like tiny grounding universal details. And if you can convince readers that your characters are real people and this world is a real world, they'll accept a touch of magic. People have this amazing ability to accept that kind of things. But what they won't believe is if your character is not relatable, if your character is not believable. That's kind of what I've always found.
That's a very good answer. The type of magic that I like to write is, I call it peripheral magic. Like, it's not even in my fantasy novels and young adult, the magic systems aren't just this very prominent, straightforward, people are waving wands and casting spells and magic is happening before your eyes. It's much more like magic that's kind of happening in the corner. You can see it in the corner of your eye. And I think that the types of things that are like, is it magic, or is it superstition, or is it coincidence, or is it religious belief, or is it a sign or an omen? When you can ask those kinds of questions about the magic that's happening, I think that readers really relate to that, because most of us have had those types of experiences where you're like, wait a minute, or like the thing that gives you chills, like a chill runs up your spine. I think if you can like tease those kinds of things out, that is what makes it very believable to me as a reader. So I think that's what I gravitate towards as a writer. But I also love to read the other kinds of magic that are like, and also like even in these books too, that I'm thinking like the movies and like the coincidences and like, is it happening or isn't it happening? Did what he said, was that a story or was it real? Was he writing about something that really happened? I think if you can get a reader to ask those questions, they're already kind of believing with you.
Live audience?
I wanted to ask you for years, because you have a book that I auto recommend to everyone who doesn't know what to read. It's Secret Horses.
Oh, yes.
Love that book. Talk a little bit about your process for coming up with that idea, because I think that belongs on a shelf with like C.S. Lewis, and like in 50 years, people should be reading that book.
Oh, thank you so
So I
much.
just really love that, and I'd love to hear like what inspired that. And
That is my very favorite book that I've written. We're not supposed to have favorites like children, but I do, not among my children, but thank you. Yeah, that book, I was actually driving to, I think it was like a book talk across the state, and actually for once turned off the podcasts, turned off the radios, just drove in silence. And I was thinking to myself, like, what would my perfect book have been as a kid? And I was driving by fields of horses, and I was such a horse lover. I just thought they were such perfect symbols of the beauty and magic in the world when I was a little girl. And I was thinking about how the relationship between little girls and horses gets made fun of a lot, or is a little bit reductive a lot, but that little girls rarely get the chance to feel powerful. And when they're on a horse, they're suddenly high up, tall, big, powerful, in control of this amazing thing, having a relationship. It's not a machine, it's an animal, and you've got this relationship with it. And so I think that's such a special relationship that gets overlooked a lot. And so combining that feeling with that kind of classic Secret Garden as historical feel, which is like, I loved reading books set in that time period, World War II era. I was so obsessed with as a girl. And so combining that together, that car ride, I came up with the whole plot, and I called my husband, and I was just like, oh my gosh, there's this story, I want to tell it. And I just told him the exact plot, like play by play. And when I got home, I wrote that book in like very short amount of time. And it's the only book I've had this experience with where it felt almost channeled to me, which I've heard other writers say, and I never really got it until this happened. And as I was writing the book, it just clicked. And the final draft is very similar to the first draft. It didn't change very much. And so I think I just managed to tap into something deep within me about that, just what was special about that story. And it's interesting because that experience of feeling like that story kind of was channeled to me a little bit is what inspired these books, because it made me wonder, like, where did this idea come from? Like, am I pulling from, well, this is Asheville, so I can be woo-woo, but I'm like, am I pulling from some other world or some like common psyche that, that we all have, or something like that. Like, and so in this world, it's kind of all about in this book, it's all about where do stories come from? And could there be other worlds and other realms where the things that happen in fiction that authors think we're coming up with actually exist, and we're just manifesting them into being. So yeah, that book did inspire a lot of it left me with that feeling.
When did that come out?
2017, I think.
Okay.
2018.
Virtual audience question from Katarina. What was the biggest challenge each of you faced as you were writing this book? And additionally, what made you grow as an author?
Well, for me, it was thinking it wouldn't be a very big deal to write a book that played with time. It was a big mistake on my part. I feel like it's so hard to write a story that plays with timelines and time travel in a way. I was so inspired by the story and the idea. And then once I started writing it, I had totally underestimated the layers beneath layers beneath layers that one change in any timeline makes, and how that doesn't just affect the story, it affects every character, and like what could have happened in the past and what will happen in the future, and just the implications of portraying that on the page and in a way that a reader can understand it and track with you was just very hard. And so it really stretched me and challenged me in a lot of ways that I've never been challenged on a book. And I think it's why I'm so proud of the book, honestly, because it was very hard to write. And so I feel like it definitely gave me a lot of tools to move forward with as a writer, and just like craft elements that maybe I had never really tried to work on before. So it now it's over. I'm okay now. But it was very, it was very harrowing there for a while.
For mine, when I first came up with the idea for Malice House, and there was this, famous novelist who's like a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he had written this amazing secret manuscript, and the first draft, I only referenced this brilliant manuscript that this man wrote, and I never included it, I just kind of touched on it. And then when I sold it, Disney's the publisher, my editor was like, well, of course you're actually going to write that manuscript, and I was like, well, no, there's no way I can do that. And I was like, oh, shoot. And I do this to myself in every book. I always have some genius character that just solves some puzzle that no one can possibly solve. And then I have to actually try to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I have, we authors have the benefit of we're able to do research. We're able to we have the benefit of time and planning. So it's in a way, you don't have to be as smart as your characters. But that was a real challenge for me, was actually coming up with those stories and writing them, and having the voice of a, 70-year-old pompous white man, and just thinking what would these stories be about? And they all touch on a childhood in the 50s, that sort of world, and the horrors that would come up from someone in his position. And it was just such a different character to write from than myself. And I actually ended up really loving doing that. Was really a fun part of putting the book together. Yeah.
Audience? Yeah.
You guys touched a little bit earlier on how challenging it can be to jump between YA and adult, either with different projects or just even finishing one and then moving completely on to a different one. That sometimes your voice changes in certain ways, and sometimes hopefully it doesn't in the overarching scheme, but some things change. Since you guys both do that, but not all authors, a lot of authors don't do that. They stick with adult, or they stick with middle grade and YA, and they never venture into adult. What do you think you guys have gained? Mm-hmm. What has changed for you over the years, venturing into different territories? How has it changed you as a person or you as a writer?
Mm-hmm. Do you have an answer?
I think for me, being a little bit more adaptable and being able to do, now I'm writing in someone else's world and matching different voices while still trying to bring my own. And so I think it's helped me expand my range a lot, which has also helped for other projects like this one, where I'm trying to write a book within a book from a very different person's perspective. And so I think I feel a lot more comfortable. It's a skill I've gained. And I've now enjoyed incorporating that into a lot of my fiction, where I will have different characters' voices and feeling more comfortable with that, or sort of melding different styles that I, probably wouldn't have done if I had just stayed in, this exact same voice that I started with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think young adult has a lot of rules about what the category is, and they are getting pretty challenged, I think, right now, but they're, typically the main character is between 14 and 19 years old, maybe 20. And so you're only working with so much life experience. How much is this person really how much has their brain even developed, So I think an adult, I have felt a lot more freedom. I don't know if you felt like this, freedom to kind of explore farther and deeper, and ask myself harder questions, and not always have answers to them either. I think when you're writing for a younger audience, there does feel, and this might just be me, but I do feel a little bit more of a pressure to have an answer to the questions I'm posing. And in adult, I don't feel that so much. I'm I can just ask a really hard question and let it be, just let it be a reality. And it feels more comfortable to do that in adults. I also think that they have just served as therapy a little bit for me.
Yes.
There's this saying among writers, writing is therapy. And then there was this generation of authors who are writing isn't therapy, go to therapy. And I'm both, writing is therapy and also go to therapy. I totally feel that about my books. I feel a lot of it is kind of very therapeutic for me.
Question from Hallie. Do the two of you have a, and this is in all caps, dream project? You're in air quotes, too scared or don't feel ready to start?
Hmm. I don't think I've ever been asked that at a book
That's a
event.
good question.
I really, really want to write zombies. I do.
Yes,
I
do it.
just do.
I love zombies.
I want to write zombies. I want to write something like apocalyptic and dystopian. And I can't figure out how to do that in my brand. So I'm like,
Zombie romance.
yes, small town zombie apocalypse.
I feel
romance.
like your voices would be great. Like I love the literary zombie books, like Carrie Ryan's
Yeah.
Forest of Hands and Teeth. Like I think that you could do like a really beautiful, very atmospheric.
Yeah,
zombie story.
I want to, maybe one day, but I am way too scared to even think about doing it right now. So that would definitely be my answer.
I have a project I've always wanted to do, and it actually started as a screenplay, and then was maybe a book. And it's just very daunting, but it's the idea of in the future, there's AI androids that have become intelligent and want to form their own kind of their own mythology. And because they feel like that's something that humans have that they lack. And so half of the book would take place in this future where there's sort of a battle between the androids and humans. And then half of it would be their mythology. And what would the androids' mythology be? Like, what would it be based on? It wouldn't be based on things that we base our history or our, stories from. And just the idea of like a truly original, like a founding tale of where these people came from in fiction, I think would be really fascinating. But I've yet to figure out what that would be.
Yeah.
So
That sounds challenging.
Yeah.
Challenges there. Question from the, yes.
So for both of you, for the new books that you've written, was there like an image or a scene that you had in your head before you started even building the plot that it was like a touchstone for you for the story? And like, what is that scene or that image, and did it make it into the final book?
Yes. There were a couple for me. One was this character standing in front of this door that's like appears in the middle of a vast like field. So it was that's very like cut and dry, like kind of literal. And then the other one was this scene that kind of played out in my head a lot of being held underwater and like the sound of the water and like the light on the surface of the water, but like being held beneath it. And I was kind of always writing toward that scene when I was drafting this novel.
yeah, so atmospheric, that feeling of like,
Mhm.
for mine, for the Malice House series, it was a kind of a twist on there's something under the bed, that kind of fear that we all have. And in the story, the main character's in this creepy old house, and the townspeople have told her it's haunted, and strange things have been happening. And kind of like you were saying, is it real? Is it not? Is it in my mind? Am I hallucinating? All this sort of thing. And she just, hears something and is just afraid that, she gets it in her head, oh my gosh, there's like something under the bed. And so she looks under the bed. And that scene, whether there is or there isn't something there, was pivotal for me for the book. And so that's kind of when I knew that would be the big turning point.
Question from another virtual audience member. When you're writing stories that make the characters really look at what they've become, and then that forces them to change, does that have an effect on you as people or authors? Are you changing? If so, how?
Wow.
We're getting good deep tonight. This is
Totally.
existential.
This goes back to therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I feel like, again, I kind of am writing my experience, even though I am not these people. I feel like a lot of times what they're going through, what they're processing are things that I'm processing, and that I'm really are almost kind of buried too deep to really touch and expose and figure out myself. And so I'm kind of doing it in this narrative that's kind of feels like a safe space to explore it. And so I feel like it's kind of the other way around. Like, I don't feel like the story is real. I'm writing the story and then it like impacts me in this way that I'm changing. I feel like I'm changing and I start writing a story about it. And it's kind of always like the root of whatever is happening in the book.
Yeah, I would agree. A lot of times it's a realization that I've had in my life that I then will put onto my character to show them having that realization.
Go learn the lesson I learned.
Yeah.
Or that I'm trying to learn over and over.
When you've going through your editing process, do you have a favorite editorial comment that had an effect on the direction of your book or how you write?
Mine goes all the way back to way before I was a novelist or even knew that that's what I wanted to do. I was in college at Chapel Hill, and I was writing a research paper. Didn't have anything to do with fiction, and took it to the campus offered a free, I don't know, editing or review service that would like read it and give you suggestions on improving your writing. And I gave it to them and they said, oh, this is really good, but you tend to write in doubles. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, you always include two things. Like, I felt tired and scared, like, you know, and that just got it stuck in my head. And now when I read my writing, every freaking line has two like subjects or two points to make. And so that's one thing that I'm constantly like editing out.
You can't unsee it now.
I can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So I cut it down to 1 or expand it to 3. Sometimes get a little variety, but I just found that to be so incredibly helpful. And then that makes me wonder what are my other blind spots about my own writing that I haven't noticed yet.
Mine are ones that have not been corrected or gotten better at all. And they are things like quotation rules. I don't understand it. Never gonna get it. That's what the copy editor's for. Like, I don't, every time I have copy edits, they're like, they have a document that comes with the copy edits called a style sheet. And they're basically like, here are the things you do wrong often. And like, you should learn from this. And every single time there's like a little like explanation about quotation rules. I just don't understand.
That's not your favorite.
It's not my favorite. Yes. And then also that I don't ever remember how to correctly spell the US versus British gray.
Oh, yes.
Always wrong. But my favorite editorial comment I've ever gotten was actually from a consultant that I hired for the Fable series that she sails and I don't sail. So I had this expert read and do notes for me. And during the storm in the scene, this thing happens. And I'm like thinking, oh, this is such a great idea. This is what's going to happen in this scene. And her comment in all caps was, she would die. She would literally die if she did this. She would break her spine. She would do that, like all this stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what I'm doing at all. Like, I just was trying to have fun with it. But I think my favorite editorial comments are when the copy editor or my editor or somebody just gets excited in the manuscript, as if it's ever happened to you. Yeah. And then they kind of break from doing their job for a second of like fixing things. And then they just leave a little comment that's like, OMG, or like, I can't believe this, or like, my heart is exploding or something. Like, those are my favorite things to find in a manuscript, and they don't pop up that often, honestly.
My editor puts a red check next to things he likes. And so I just, the minute I get a manuscript, they have a red check.
That's actually really cute.
Final question from the live audience. Oh, yes.
I know you mentioned you wrote your secret horse book rather quickly, but for both of you, how often are you start a project and you have great ideas and then you get like writer's block, or you have a hard time finishing it, and do you finish it, or do you go to Starbucks and start something new?
Well, gone are the days when you just don't have to finish something because you're contracted for it now. I am contracted, so I already got paid for part of the book. So now I have different strategies to get through writer's block, and I have a lot more faith that I will get through it than I used to. Like, when I used to hit writer's block before, I'd be like, all is lost, dark night of the soul. Like, I'm never going to get through this. This book is dead and I'm never going to fix it. And I need to walk away. Now I feel like I've hit that point enough times to believe it. Like I just need to push through this part. Like I'm going to get through this part. This is a cycle. It always happens. So I feel like I have better tools now to deal with that. But there is always a temptation to just start working on a new idea when things get hard in a current manuscript, because it's like, they call it the shiny new idea. And they're like more derogatory terms for it too, but like things like they are just like calling to you from the shadows, like, come over here and write me. I'll be so much easier and more like and more fun. And like, you don't even have to worry about that really hard project you're working on. And I think that a lot of writers deal with that as well. Have to resist the temptation.
Yeah, I agree that
I did silence it, I swear. It's a timer reminder for my kids' homework. I'm sorry. Saw it light up and I was like.
When it's a story that is either already contracted and paid for, or is something I really believe in, I am now able, like you said, to tell myself it's okay for it to be messy, like to accept if it feels like it's just falling apart, like it's just never going to come together, to accept that and keep going and then go back and fix it and fix it and fix it. Whereas before, like I did struggle with just wanting to abandon it and run and hide and never look at it again. But there are lots of ideas that I still abandon for whatever reason at this point. I have like a 50% success rate when it comes to publishing. Like not every idea I come up with ends up being a book. It's only about half of them do. And so, you know, some of them have been a whole book. I have written whole books that did not get published for one reason or another. And other times it's just an idea where I do get, you know, 100 pages in and I realize, you know, this idea is not strong enough for a whole book or a whole series or something like that. And so it doesn't, the rejection doesn't end ever, even if it's just us deciding ourselves, you know, that to let go of an idea.
Any final thoughts from the two of you, and then we'll wrap up?
Just thanks everybody for
Yeah,
coming.
thanks
I
for
really,
coming.
really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Congratulations.